They say you never truly know a person until money enters the equation. I learned this truth at 78 years old, lying in a hospital bed, pretending to be unconscious while my only son plotted my murder. My name is Solomon Gray, and this is the story of how I destroyed the man I raised, loved, and ultimately had to teach the hardest lesson of his miserable life. The morphine drip was supposed to keep me sedated, but my body had always been stubborn. That September evening, as golden light filtered through the hospital blinds, I floated in that strange space between sleep and consciousness. I could hear everything, but my body refused to respond. The doctors called it a temporary side effect of the stroke. I called it divine intervention. "How much longer does he have?" That was my son's voice. Marcus, 45 years old, with my jawline and his mother's cold eyes. "Hard to say," replied a voice I didn't recognize. Male, young, uncertain. "The stroke was severe. Could be weeks, could be months. He's strong for his age. But he won't recover. He won't be able to change his will or anything." A pause. The kind of pause that changes everything. "Mr. Gray, I'm not comfortable with. I asked you a question, doctor." Marcus's tone shifted. I knew that voice. It was the one he used when closing business deals, when crushing competitors, when getting what he wanted. "You said yourself the brain damage is extensive. He's a vegetable." So let me be clear. I need to know if there's any chance he wakes up lucid enough to alter his legal documents. My heart monitor should have been screaming, but somehow it stayed steady. Maybe even God wanted me to hear this. Technically, no, the doctor admitted. The damage to his frontal lobe and speech centers is too severe. Even if he regains consciousness, he won't have the mental capacity to make legal decisions. Good. I could hear the smile in Marcus's voice. That's very good. Now, let's talk about acceleration. Excuse me? You heard me. I want to know what it would take to speed up the natural process. Humanely, of course. I'm not a monster. But my father is suffering, doctor. Isn't it cruel to let him linger like this? The silence stretched like taffy. I wanted to open my eyes, to sit up, to wrap my hands around my son's throat. But I remained still, listening, learning. Mr. Gray, I could lose my license for even having this conversation. But you haven't walked away, have you? Paper rustled. That's $20,000. Cash. There's another 30 when it's done. All you have to do is adjust his medications. A little less of this, a little more of that. These things happen in hospitals all the time. Tragic, but natural. I need to think about it. You have until tomorrow morning. My father has already lived a long, full life. He's made his fortune, and now it's time for it to pass to the next generation. The Gray Empire needs active leadership, not a brain-dead old man draining resources. Footsteps receded. The door whispered shut. I was alone with the steady beep of my heart monitor and the crushing weight of betrayal. Marcus wasn't just willing to let me die. He was paying someone to kill me. My son. My only child. The boy I taught to ride a bike, to swim, to build his first business. The man I'd built an empire for, alongside him. The heir to $300 million in real estate, investments, and assets. And he couldn't wait a few months for nature to take its course. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't just survive. I would make him pay for every single word he'd spoken in that room. But first, I had to wake up. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. They're wrong. Revenge is a dish that must be prepared with the patience of a master chef, simmered slowly, with careful attention to every ingredient. Over the next 72 hours, I worked harder than I'd worked in my entire life. The stroke had damaged my body, yes, but my mind was sharp as ever, trapped in a prison of unresponsive flesh. I focused every ounce of will on my right index finger. Move. 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 On the third day, I twitched it. The nurse, a kind Filipino woman named Maria, nearly dropped her clipboard. "Mr. Gray! Doctor! He's responding!" Within an hour, I had a team of neurologists around my bed, shining lights in my eyes, asking me to squeeze hands, to blink once for yes and twice for no. I played it carefully. I showed just enough progress to prove consciousness, but not enough to suggest full recovery. I couldn't let Marcus know what I was capable of. "It's remarkable," Dr. Peterson said, reviewing my scans. "The brain has an incredible capacity to heal. Mr. Gray is showing signs of awareness, though his motor control and speech are still severely compromised. But he can understand us." Marcus stood at the foot of my bed, his face arranged in an expression of concerned sun. Only I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the quick assessment of whether this changed his plans. "Yes, we believe so. The comprehension centers appear largely intact. But can he communicate? Complex thoughts? Legal decisions?" Dr. Peterson shook his head. "That's unlikely for months, if ever. He'll need extensive therapy, and even then, his capacity for complex reasoning may be permanently impaired." I watched Marcus relax. Good. Let him think I was broken. Over the next week, I met the young doctor Marcus had tried to bribe. Dr. Andrew Chin, 32, with gambling debts and a cocaine habit he thought he'd hidden well. I knew because I'd made it my business to know everything about everyone in that hospital. When he came to check my vitals one night, I was ready. With enormous effort, I caught his wrist with my right hand. His eyes went wide. "Mr. Gray, that's excellent motor control." I squeezed harder. Not enough to hurt, just enough to communicate. Our eyes met, and I let him see everything. The awareness. The intelligence. The knowledge. He went white. You heard." I blinked once. "Yes." "Oh, God." He sank into the chair beside my bed, head in his hands. "I didn't take it." "I swear I didn't take the money." I told him no. "You have to believe me." I blinked once again. Then I pointed to the notepad on my bedside table. It took him a moment to understand, but he placed it on my lap and put a pen in my hand. My writing was chicken scratch, barely legible, but I managed 3 words. "I know. Help." Dr. Chen looked at those words for a long time. When he finally raised his eyes, I saw a man making a choice. "What do you need?" Over the next hour, through painful, laborious writing, I laid out the first phase of my plan. Dr. Chen would tell Marcus I was declining. He'd suggest Marcus should prepare for the worst. Meanwhile, he would document everything: the bribe attempt, Marcus's visits, every cold calculation my son made while standing over my supposedly dying body. "Why not just go to the police now?" Dr. Chen asked. I wrote slowly. "Not enough. Need more." Because I didn't just want Marcus arrested. I wanted him destroyed. I wanted him to feel the same betrayal, the same helplessness, the same crushing weight of his own choices. I wanted him to lose everything, the way he'd been so willing to take everything from me. And I had the perfect plan. Physical therapy was hell, but I embraced it. Every small victory, lifting my arm, taking a step with a walker, speaking a garbled sentence, was documented. I made sure to progress just enough to be moved to a rehabilitation facility, but slowly enough that Marcus never worried. He visited twice a week, always with the same performance. Concern etched on his face, holding my limp hand, speaking loudly and slowly as if I were a child. "Dad, I want you to know I'm taking care of everything. The company, the properties, all of it. Don't worry about anything. Just focus on getting better. What he meant was, I'm carving up your empire like a Thanksgiving turkey, and there's nothing you can do about it. Through Dr. Chen and my lawyer, brought in secretly through a side entrance, I learned what Marcus was really doing. He convinced the board I was incapacitated and had himself appointed CEO. He was selling off properties, liquidating investments, funneling money into offshore accounts. He'd even started dating my secretary, a woman 30 years his junior, buying her gifts with company money. All of this I documented. All of this I saved. 3 months into my recovery, I achieved a major milestone. I could speak in full sentences. They were slow, sometimes slurred, but coherent. The therapist celebrated. Dr. Chen sent word to Marcus immediately. My son arrived within hours. "Dad, this is wonderful news." He gripped my shoulders, his smile bright as a shark's. "Can you understand me? Do you know who I am?" "Marcus," I said slowly, letting my words drag. "My son." "Yes, that's right." He pulled up a chair, leaning close. "Dad, do you remember what happened? The stroke?" "Don't remember much." Confused. "That's okay. That's normal. The doctors say your memory might be affected." He paused, and I could see him calculating. "Dad, do you remember the company? Gray Enterprises?" I furrowed my brow, as if trying to recall something distant. "Company, yes. My company." "That's right. Your company. Dad, I need to ask you something important. While you've been sick, I've been running things, making decisions. Was that okay?" I nodded slowly. "You good son. Take care of things." The relief on his face was almost comical. "Exactly. That's exactly what I've been doing. Dad, there are some papers I need you to sign. Just formalities, really. Transferring some assets, updating some accounts. The lawyers say it's important for tax purposes." He pulled out a folder. Inside were documents that would effectively sign over everything I owned to Marcus, grant him power of attorney, and make him the sole beneficiary of my estate, bypassing the more complex will I created that included charities, distant relatives, and loyal employees. Can you write your name?" he asked, pulling out a pen. I took the pen with a shaking hand, stared at the papers. Let a tear roll down my cheek. "Too much," I whispered. "Too hard. Can't. It's okay, Dad. We can do this later, when you're stronger." But I heard the frustration in his voice, the barely contained anger. He wanted his inheritance, and I was inconveniently clinging to life and legal capacity. Over the next 2 months, Marcus tried everything. He brought in different lawyers, different documents, even a notary who he clearly bribed. Each time, I played the confused old man, sometimes getting close to signing before, getting tired, or confused, or having a bad spell. It was driving him insane, and I loved every minute of it. But I was also preparing. My real lawyer, James Patterson, a man I'd known for 40 years, was working behind the scenes. We were building an ironclad case, documenting every illegal action Marcus had taken. The financial fraud, the corporate theft, the attempted bribery of Dr. Chun, who'd worn a wire during several subsequent conversations with Marcus. And we had one more trick up our sleeve. 6 months after my stroke, the doctors declared my recovery remarkable and released me from the rehabilitation facility. Marcus had graciously arranged for me to move into his home, a sprawling estate I'd actually bought him 10 years ago, where he could take care of me. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd converted the first-floor study into a bedroom for me, complete with a hospital bed, a nurse, and enough medical equipment to stock a small clinic. It was a gilded cage, and Marcus was my smiling jailer. "We're going to take such good care of you, Dad," he said, helping me into a wheelchair I didn't actually need. I'd been walking with a cane for weeks, but I let him think I was frailier than I was. "I've hired round-the-clock care. The best physical therapists. Whatever you need." What I needed was for him to get comfortable. To think he'd won. That night, after the nurse had given me my medications and left me alone, I climbed out of bed with ease. My recovery had been genuine, the stroke had been real, the initial paralysis had been real. But for the last 3 months, I'd been milking it, exaggerating my limitations, playing the feeble old man while my body healed and my plan crystallized. I made my way through the dark house to Marcus's office. He was predictable, my son. Always had been. His computer password was still his birthday. I'd watched him type it a dozen times through the reflection in a picture frame. His files were meticulously organized, every crime documented with the confidence of a man who thought himself untouchable. I copied everything to the USB drive hidden in my pocket and returned to bed before the night nurse made her rounds. 2 weeks later, I suggested a party. "Party?" Marcus looked up from his phone, where he'd been texting his secretary girlfriend. "Birthday, coming up," I said haltingly. 79. "Want, family together." Marcus's eyes lit up. He'd been waiting for an opportunity like this. "That's a wonderful idea, Dad. We should celebrate. You've come so far. I'll invite everyone, the board, business partners, family. We'll make it a real event. And lawyers," I added. "Want to make things official. Papers. Sign them. At party. Everyone witness." If Marcus had been a dog, his tail would have been wagging. "Of course, Dad. Whatever you want. Let's get you taken care of, legally and properly." He thought I was finally giving in, that I'd accepted my fate and wanted to hand over my empire with dignity, surrounded by people who'd witness my mental competence. He had no idea he was building his own gallows. The night of my 79th birthday arrived with crystalline clarity. Marcus had spared no expense. The estate was transformed into something from a magazine. String lights crisscrossed the gardens, a full orchestra played in the ballroom, and caterers wove through crowds of the wealthy and powerful. Everyone was there. The board of directors of Gray Enterprises. Business partners from 30 years of dealings. My lawyers. Marcus's lawyers. Distant cousins I barely knew, but who hoped for inheritance crumbs. And at my specific request, several reporters from the business section of major newspapers, invited under the guise of covering a feel-good story. Real estate mogul celebrates recovery and succession. I played my part perfectly. Arriving in a wheelchair, though I could walk, accepting condolences and congratulations with equal humility. Marcus fluttered around me like an attentive butterfly, the perfect devoted son. At 8 o'clock, Marcus tapped a champagne flute for attention. The crowd gathered in the ballroom, hundreds of faces turning toward us. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Marcus began, his voice carrying that practiced warmth of a natural politician. 6 months ago, we nearly lost him. My father, Solomon Gray, suffered a massive stroke that doctors said would likely end his life. But Dad is a fighter. He's not just survived, he's come back to us." Applause rippled through the crowd. I smiled weakly, the grateful patriarch. "Tonight, Dad has asked us all here not just to celebrate his birthday, but to witness something important. After 79 years of life and 50 years of building Gray Enterprises into what it is today, he's ready to ensure his legacy continues." "Dad?" Marcus wheeled me to a table where documents were spread out. His lawyers flanked one side, mine, the fake ones he thought were mine, on the other. I looked at the papers. The same ones he'd been trying to get me to sign for months. Complete transfer of assets. Power of attorney. Everything. Son, I said, my voice still carrying that slight slur I perfected. Before I sign, want to say something. Of course, Dad. Marcus handed me a microphone, his smile bright. I took it. Let the moment stretch. Then I stood up from the wheelchair. The crowd gasped. Marcus's face went slack. Surprise, I said, my voice suddenly clear as a bell. Turns out I made a full recovery about 3 months ago. I walked to the center of the room, my gait steady, my spine straight. For those of you wondering, yes, I've been faking it. The confusion, the weakness, most of the physical limitations. Because I needed to see something. I needed to know what my son would do when he thought I was helpless. Marcus had gone pale. Dad, what are you? Shut up, Marcus. The words cracked like a whip. You've talked enough. For 6 months you've talked, made plans, made decisions. So now it's my turn. I turned to the crowd, many of whom looked thoroughly confused. 6 months ago, while I lay in a hospital bed recovering from a very real stroke, my son approached a doctor with a bribe. $20,000 upfront, $30,000 on completion. The job? Adjust my medications to speed up the natural process. His words, not mine. My son tried to have me killed. The room erupted. Denials from Marcus, gasps from the crowd, cameras flashing as reporters scrambled for their devices. That's a lie, Marcus shouted. Dad, the stroke has affected your mind. You're confused, paranoid. Am I? I pulled out my phone and connected it to the room's audio system. Because I have recordings. Dr. Andrew Chen, if you could stand up. Dr. Chen, positioned in the crowd, stood. He looked terrified but determined. Dr. Chen, did Marcus Gray offer you $50,000 to hasten my death? Yes, sir. He did. I documented everything and reported it to hospital administration and the police. And did he, over the following months, continue to pressure you? Try to find other ways to ensure I didn't recover enough to change my will? Yes, sir. I have recordings of 7 different conversations. I pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the room. The old man needs to go. I can't wait forever. There has to be something you can do. Another stroke, an infection, anything that looks natural. I stopped the recording. Marcus was shouting, his face red, but his lawyers were holding him back, whispering urgently in his ears. But wait, I said, walking slowly around the room. There's more. While I was supposedly incapacitated, Marcus assumed control of Gray Enterprises, which, I should note, he was never authorized to do. The board voted him in based on false medical reports he provided, claiming I was brain dead. I nodded to James Patterson, my real lawyer, who stepped forward with a presentation remote. A screen lowered behind me, and financial documents appeared. In 6 months, Marcus has embezzled $47 million from the company. He's sold properties at below-market rates to companies he secretly owns. He's funneled money through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. He's used company funds to support a lavish lifestyle, including gifts for his mistress, my former secretary, Sarah Chin, who's here tonight. Sarah, darling, did you know the Cartier bracelet you're wearing was bought with stolen money? The young woman in the corner went white. I have documentation of every transaction, every forged signature, every illegal transfer. My real legal team has been building a case for months, working with the FBI and IRS. I turned back to Marcus. He'd stopped shouting. He was just staring at me with pure hatred. You're probably wondering why I didn't just go to the police immediately. Why I let this drag out. Why I pretended to be helpless while you stole from me, lied about me, tried to kill me. I walked up to him, close enough to see the sweat on his upper lip. Because I wanted you to feel what I felt. That helplessness. I wanted you to have hope, to think you'd won, and then have it all taken away. I wanted you to experience the betrayal of someone you trusted completely turning against you. How does it feel, son? Marcus lunged at me. His lawyers caught him, but not before he screamed, "You vindictive old bastard. This is about control. You could never let go. You'd rather destroy me than let me have what's mine. What's yours?" I laughed, cold and bitter. "You didn't build Gray Enterprises. You coasted on my name, my connections, my work. And the moment you thought I couldn't stop you, you tried to steal it all. Well, congratulations, Marcus. You succeeded in one thing. You've destroyed yourself." I turned to the crowd, where I could see police officers making their way through. I'd called them 30 minutes ago, told them to come at 8:30 sharp. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you all to witness this. Marcus Gray is being arrested tonight for attempted murder, fraud, embezzlement, and a dozen other charges. The evidence is overwhelming. The case is airtight. And I want you all to remember that this man, my son, chose money over everything. Over love. Over family. Over basic human decency. The officers reached Marcus. He didn't resist as they cuffed him, but his eyes never left mine. "I'm your son," he said, his voice breaking. "How can you do this to your own son?" I leaned in close, so only he could hear. "I'm not doing this to my son. I'm doing this to a criminal who happens to share my DNA. My son died the moment he decided $50,000 was enough to murder his father." They led him away. The crowd was chaos, reporters shouting questions, board members conferring in urgent whispers, guests fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. I returned to the microphone. "For those of you wondering about the future of Gray Enterprises, I'm returning as CEO effective immediately. The board will be restructured. Anyone who colluded with Marcus and his schemes will be investigated and removed. And my will has been updated." I paused, letting that sink in. "Everything I own will be placed in a trust. 40% will go to my employees, divided based on years of service. 30% will go to various charities. 20% will establish a foundation for stroke research and recovery. The remaining 10% will be distributed among family members, who can prove they've made something of themselves without my money." "And Marcus?" someone shouted. "Marcus gets nothing. Even if by some miracle he beats these charges, he's written out completely. I'd rather burn every dollar I've ever made than let him touch a penny of it." The trial was spectacular. Marcus's lawyers tried everything, argued I'd manipulated evidence, claimed my stroke had made me vindictive and paranoid, even attempted to paint Dr. Chen as the real villain who tried to extort Marcus, and then fabricated evidence when Marcus refused. None of it worked. The evidence was overwhelming. Recordings, financial documents, testimony from a dozen witnesses. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before finding Marcus guilty on all counts. 25 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for 15 years. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row, making sure he saw me. Making sure he understood that his father, the man he tried to kill, to rob, to erase, had destroyed him with the same ruthless efficiency Marcus had once admired in business dealings. The day of sentencing, as they led him away in chains, Marcus turned to me one last time. "Was it worth it?" he shouted across the courtroom. "Was your revenge worth losing your son?" I stood up, leaned on my cane. I still needed it sometimes, on bad days, and met his eyes. "I lost my son the day he chose money over my life. This isn't revenge, Marcus. This is justice. And yes, it was worth every single moment." I'm sitting in my office, the real one, at Gray Enterprises, not the cage Marcus built for me in his home. The company has recovered. The employees who received shares are more motivated than ever. The charities are doing good work. The Stroke Research Foundation has already funded 3 promising studies. I'm 80 years old now. My hair is white, my joints ache, and I walk with a cane more often than not. The stroke did damage me. Some of it permanent. But I'm alive. I'm free. And I've learned something valuable about revenge. People say it's hollow, that it doesn't heal wounds. They're wrong. Revenge, when executed perfectly, when the guilty party truly deserves their punishment, can be deeply satisfying. Marcus didn't just commit a crime. He committed the ultimate betrayal. He deserved to lose everything, and watching him face the consequences of his choices didn't make me bitter. It made me free. Last week, I received a letter from Marcus. The first communication in a year. I almost threw it away unread, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single page, written in his handwriting. Dad, I spend every day in this cell thinking about what I did. The counselors here say I need to take responsibility, to understand my choices, to feel genuine remorse. The truth is, I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. I was raised in your shadow. Everything I did, every success, was always compared to you. Nothing was ever enough. So when you got sick, when I thought I'd finally have a chance to step out from under your legacy and be my own man, I convinced myself you owed me, that I'd earned it, that it was my turn. I was wrong. Not just legally wrong, but morally wrong. I understand that now. You were my father, and I tried to kill you for money. There's no justification for that. No excuse. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the oxygen I'm breathing. But I wanted you to know that your lesson landed. I understand now what I destroyed. And I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I threw away the only thing that really mattered, the love of my father, for money I didn't need. I'm sorry. For whatever those words are worth, I'm sorry. Marcus. I read the letter 3 times. Felt the weight of it. The genuine remorse, or maybe just the sophisticated manipulation of a con man who'd had a year to perfect his approach. In the end, it didn't matter which. I took the letter to the fireplace in my office and held it over the flames. Watched the edges curl and blacken. Then I pulled it back at the last moment. I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer of my desk. Not because I forgave him. Not because I believed him. But because it was proof. Proof that my revenge had accomplished exactly what I'd intended. Marcus had lost everything. His freedom, his fortune, his future. But more than that, he'd lost himself. The confident, arrogant man who'd stood over my hospital bed plotting murder was gone, replaced by this broken creature begging for scraps of forgiveness from his father's table. That was the real revenge. Not the prison sentence. Not the lost money. But the knowledge that he'd spend the rest of his life understanding exactly what he'd thrown away, and knowing he could never get it back. I returned to my desk and opened my laptop. There was work to do. An empire to run. Employees counting on me. Charities to fund. A legacy to build that would outlast both of us. Outside my window, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. I poured myself 2 fingers of scotch, doctor's orders be damned, and raised the glass in a private toast. To revenge, I said quietly, and to living long enough to see it through. The scotch burned going down, warm and perfect. I had one. Not because I'd destroyed my son, but because I'd proven that even at 79, even after a stroke, even when the whole world thought I was helpless and broken, I was still Solomon Gray. And Solomon Gray always finishes what he starts. Somewhere in a federal prison, Marcus was learning that lesson the hard way. And every day he spent there, every morning he woke up in a cell, every night He went to sleep knowing he'd thrown away everything for nothing. That was my victory. Not revenge served cold. Revenge served with the patient precision of a man who'd spent his entire life building empires and destroying obstacles. I'd built great enterprises from nothing. I'd raised a son. I'd survived a stroke and an attempted murder. And in the end, I'd taught the most important lesson of all: betray the ones who love you, and you'll pay a price that no amount of money can ever repay. I finished my scotch and returned to my work. There was still so much to do, and time, I had learned, was the most precious commodity of all. Not to be wasted on bitterness or regret, but spent building something that would outlast the betrayals, the pain, the revenge. Something that would matter long after both Marcus and I were nothing but names on tombstones and lessons in cautionary tales. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the city lights began to glow. I smiled and got back to work. After all, empires don't build themselves. And Solomon Gray still had empires to build.